So let's talk more about, we were talking about the transition as far as the information is concerned. What do you see as far as, when folks are looking for systems, they're starting to evaluate them, where do you see them starting, or where do you recommend they start? I mean, how does that whole process unfold?
When we do an assessment, we start with what do you have in place right now?
Mm-hmm.
How will that integrate with your new package that you've selected, and what equipment do we need to add to make the infrastructure run as smoothly as possible?
It's kind of like getting a checkup. If you haven't gotten a, using a doctor analogy, thank you very much. Right. If you haven't had a physical in a while, you got to get a baseline, figure out where you're at, and then what you need to do about it, right?
Well, it's important to get a good assessment of what their current IT is, because that allows them to project what expenses they're gonna have when they come in to get in this new EMR system as well. Because if they don't have anything in place right now, then that whole network may have to be revamped, and so that's something you need to be aware of before jumping into this thing, because you don't want that to be a surprise in the end and go, oh hey, well I didn't know this was going to be such an issue.
And once you do decide on a hardware vendor, it usually takes us around 6 weeks to get from order to being ready to go live, and that's putting all the devices in place, testing, configuring. So there's a good lead time that you have to keep in mind when you're doing your planning for an implementation.
Because EMR software is only a piece of the puzzle, and oftentimes it's the most expensive piece of the puzzle, and it's the most obvious piece of the puzzle, because that's what the physicians and the staff are going to have to interact with on a daily basis. So that's that makes it the most obvious, and rightly so. But like you just said, if you don't have the infrastructure there, infrastructure being, do you already have the office cabled for computers? Some don't. Do you already have computers that will run the new software?
Internet connection.
Do you have an internet connection? Probably do.
Probably.
But do you have computers that are still the old green screens that don't even have a mouse connected to it?
Well, you may have some that meet the specifications of a software provider. You may not. So some of those may just need an upgrade. Some
old, some new. Figure out which ones to keep, which ones to upgrade, and then there's the whole piece of the puzzle with servers, because most folks, they may have a server in their office. They may not even call it that. They may not think of it as that, but maybe it's the computer that runs the scheduling or the billing system. Right. But for the most part, probably not what you're going to install your new EMR software on. So that definitely comes into figuring out. And we've talked on the program before about the idea of minimum specifications versus recommended specifications. And so that's where having your IT expert help you kind of interpret what the software vendor is suggesting, that really comes into play, because they can help you think about the growth that you're going to have, how much hard drive storage you're not going to need this year, but more importantly, how much hard drive storage you're going to need 5 years from now when you're still using the system. Things like that definitely play in. What would you say that the top 3 things that you tell a doc or admin before or as they embark on the whole EMR journey?
Number 1 for me would be take your time. Do your due diligence. There's so many software packages out there that some are customized to certain specialties. So take your time, do your demos, make your selection with keeping all that in mind. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just do your review, do your due diligence, and make the selection that's right for you.
I would say, by all means, interview as many different software providers as you have time to do. Mm-hmm. Usually this process takes as much as a year or more, just depending on, usually depends on the size of the organization, but the more software providers you interview, the more information you're going to find out, the more you're going to find out about what you need that you may not have known before. Oh, well, hey, this guy offers this and this guy didn't. So the more of that you find out, the better. I mean, it's not going to be a waste of time at all.
Yeah, it's not an overnight process. It's not like shopping for a car or, maybe the analogy or the parallel would be more like thinking about building a new house, because you've got to think through all those steps, or not the steps, but you've got to really think through what's important to you. Otherwise, you'll end up with whatever you end up with, and then it's done.
And another thing is to make sure that your software has the capabilities of doing what it is that you need to do, because every office is different, every specialty is different. So some software providers, they specialize in certain specialties and they do that really well. So you've kind of got to ask yourself, okay, well, this is a very important piece of my business, and I need my software to be able to do this. Make sure it has that capability, or those capabilities can be programmed in before you go out and purchase your software.
So, you know, put a checklist together. Maybe think before you even call the first vendor or make contact with the first salesperson. Sit down with your practice administrator, your office manager, maybe even a couple of key staff people that have been there the longest that really knows how the office runs. Maybe it's those people that you think, gosh, when they're out sick or when they're out on vacation, things don't run as well. Those would probably be the people to get around the table and buy some coffee and figure, you know, start a little list. But, you know, maybe start there, even if you had like a legal pad, and just jot down a couple of notes about, okay, these things are probably going to be important to us. Let's start there, because there's over 350 some odd electronic medical records vendors. Now, some of them are specialty specific, like you said, like if you're you know, nephrology, if you're, you know, gastroenterology, or whatever your specialty type is, there are vendors out there that do software just for your type of practice. There's also vendors that will serve your practice, but they don't necessarily tailor it. They don't sell just to a specialty type. You know, it's more broad-based. Pros and cons to either one of those as well. But I think that's a good point that you had about know what you want when you go in.
Know what questions to ask.
Know what questions to ask, because otherwise, you know, the salesperson might just kind of say, well, look, here's what we think the buying criteria should be.
Or go, oh, hey, that'll be ready by then. We'll have that.
Right.
Once you make your selection, I would recommend take your time with the implementation process. We've seen a lot of people try to rush their way through it, try to go live in 6 weeks, a month, whatever. Yeah, take your time, plan, make sure you have all the components in place that you need.
Well before go live. Make sure it's in place before you
Right.
decide to go live.
Right.
Don't make your deadline date for getting everything in place the Friday before the Monday of go live.
Right.